The wind howled like a living thing outside the diner's frost-laced windows, rattling the glass with each gust as snow piled thick against the curb. Nora Fields poured another cup of lukewarm coffee for a trucker, who barely looked up, his hands wrapped around the mug like it held the meaning of life. She glanced at the clock. Almost 10:30 p.m. The dinner crowd had thinned to one booth, and a man nursing his fourth refill. She should have left an hour ago, but Darla, the diner's owner, had begged her to cover late again. And honestly, what was waiting at home? A rented cabin with a space heater that never quite fought off Montana nights, and a fridge that echoed when she opened it. Nora wiped her hands on a clean towel and stared out at the storm. It was supposed to be light flurries. Instead, it looked like December had declared war. The sky was nothing but swirling white streetlights glowing like ghosts in the dark. That's when she saw them. Two tiny figures, barely shadows, stumbling down the sidewalk outside the diner. Her breath caught. Kids. She squinted. One of them held the other's hand. They were too small to be out alone, let alone in this weather. They didn't stop, just kept walking, heads bowed against the wind. Nora didn't think. She dropped the towel, pushed through the door into the cold boots crunching over snow. The blast of wind slapped her skin, pulled tears from her eyes, but she didn't stop. "Hey," she called out, waving both arms. "Hey, over here!" The smaller figure stumbled. The taller one, maybe 7, 8 years old, tightened his grip on his brother and turned eyes wide with panic. Nora jogged toward them, heart hammering in her chest. "It's okay," she said, slowing as she reached them. "Come on, let's get you inside. You're freezing." The younger boy didn't speak. His lips were blue. His jacket was paper thin. Nora crouched and opened her arms without thinking. "It's warm inside. I've got hot chocolate. Real stuff, not powder." That did it. The older one nodded, jaw tight, and walked forward. She wrapped an arm around each of them, shielding their bodies as best she could, and hustled them back into the diner. The warmth hit like a wave. The boys sagged, visibly shaking now that they were inside. Nora led them to the nearest booth and wrapped them in the extra flannel shirts and towels from the back. They didn't protest, just sat there trembling and wide-eyed, clinging to each other. Darla peeked out from the kitchen. "What in heaven's name, get the cocoa on?" Nora snapped. "And grilled cheese, too. Now." Darla blinked, but obeyed. Nora knelt beside the booth, her voice low. "What are your names?" The older one hesitated. Then Miles. "This is Eli. Hi, Miles." "Eli." She offered a soft smile. "I'm Nora. You're safe now." "Okay." Miles didn't nod, but his hand slipped into hers under the table. Small. Ice cold. The cocoa arrived. Eli's hands shook as he grabbed the mug. He slurped greedily, burning his tongue, but didn't stop. Nora blinked hard and stood moving to pour herself a coffee she didn't want. She kept glancing at them as they ate. They didn't talk, didn't ask for anything, just devoured the sandwiches and drank until their mugs were empty. Darla came out again, lowering her voice. "What's the story I don't know yet? You calling someone Nora?" hesitated. "Not tonight." Darla gave her a look. "They're just kids, that's exactly why." Darla sighed, but walked away. After a while, the boys' shivers lessened. Eli leaned into Miles' eyes, fluttering closed. Miles sat rigid, like if he relaxed for even a second, the world might crumble. Nora sat across from him. "Do you want to tell me where your parents are?" His eyes flicked to hers, then away. We were supposed to be picked up. They didn't come. They are our mom's friend." Something was off, but pushing wouldn't help. Nora nodded slowly. "Okay. You're safe now? You can sleep at my place tonight. Just one night. Warm bed, Extra blankets? Sound good? Miles looked at Eli, whose head had sunk onto his shoulder, then back to Nora. You're not going to call someone? Not tonight, she said again, gentle but firm. She didn't say CPS. She didn't say police. She just reached across the table and squeezed his hand once. Miles looked down. Okay. She packed up the leftovers, bundled the boys again in spare towels, and led them to her old Subaru parked behind the diner. The heater wheezed to life as she strapped them into the back seat. They didn't speak all the way home. Nora's cabin wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a temperamental fireplace, but it was warm enough, and it had clean sheets. She gave them her bed, found some extra socks, laid a heating pad at their feet and tucked them in without asking questions. Eli was asleep in minutes. Miles stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Nora sat on the floor beside the bed. You okay? He nodded, but it was slow. Careful. You don't even know us. I know you were cold, she said softly. I know you were hungry. That's enough. A long silence passed before he whispered, Thank you. Nora didn't move, just sat there, her legs going numb, watching over these 2 boys who had walked out of the storm and into her life. She didn't know who they really were. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But something in her gut whispered everything just changed. And it wasn't just for them. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Nora barely slept. Even after the boys had drifted off, Eli curled into a ball under her quilt. Miles lying stiff and alert beside him, her body wouldn't rest. She sat on the couch with a cup of peppermint tea, watching the snow fall outside her window, like confetti from a sky that couldn't make up its mind. Everything was too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something big and just before something bigger. She glanced at the small clock on her shelf. 4:17 a.m. Outside, the storm had eased into soft flakes. Her breath fogged on the window pane as she leaned in to look. No footprints, no headlights, just a thick blanket of untouched white. She whispered into the silence. What did I just step into? At 6:30, Eli's small footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. His hair was flattened on one side, and his pajama pants loaned from Nora's donation pile dragged under his feet. He blinked at her from the doorway, then yawned. I'm hungry. Nora smiled gently. Pancakes. He nodded without hesitation. By the time Miles wandered out, drawn by the smell of butter and syrup, Eli was already perched at the tiny kitchen table, chin resting on one hand, while the other gripped a fork. You didn't have to do all this, Miles said, voice wary. Nora glanced over her shoulder. It's just pancakes. You're not allergic to anything, right? He shook his head but didn't sit. I know it's weird, she continued, flipping the last pancake onto a plate, waking up in a stranger's house. But I wasn't about to leave you out in that storm, and I figured breakfast might make this slightly less awkward. Miles finally sat. You don't know who we are. I know you're cold, hungry, and way too polite for most kids I've met. She set a plate in front of him. That's enough for me. He studied her like he was trying to figure out if she was pretending. Then he picked up his fork and took a bite. Nora smiled to herself and sat down across from them. They were halfway through breakfast when a knock shattered the calm. 3 quick raps on the door. No hesitation. Nora froze. Her heartbeat thumped in her ears. Miles set his fork down, suddenly pale. She stood slowly. Don't worry, it's probably Darla checking in. But even as she crossed the room, something in her gut said otherwise. She opened the door only a few inches, just enough to see him. Tall, sharp features, thick black coat dusted with snow. Expensive. Too expensive for Missoula. His eyes met hers, dark, intense, scanning. I'm looking for 2 boys, he said, voice low but controlled. Someone told me they might be here. Nora's grip tightened on the door. Who told you that? The woman who runs the diner? Darla. Of course she did. Before she could say another word, a soft voice came from behind her. As the man's entire expression cracked, he stepped forward, hand pressed to the doorframe like it was the only thing holding him up. Thank God. Miles stood behind her now, Eli peeking around his leg. The man dropped to a crouch right there in the snow. Miles. Eli. His voice shook. Are you okay? The boys moved together slowly. Then, as if something invisible had finally broken, they rushed forward, and the man gathered them both into his arms. Nora stepped back, the cold air slipping inside. He held them tightly, whispering something she couldn't hear. She stood by awkward, and still a pancake spatula still in her hand. Eventually the man looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. Not from the cold. You saved them, he said, breathless. You brought them in, fed them, kept them safe. Nora cleared her throat, suddenly uncomfortable. They were freezing. I couldn't leave them. Most people would have called someone and left it at that. He rose, his hand still resting on Eli's shoulder. You didn't. The silence stretched. I'm Caleb, he added finally. Caleb Winslow. And just like that, it clicked. She'd heard the name on the local news once. Some article about tech startups and real estate acquisitions. He owned the biggest tech firm in the Northwest Corridor. Quietly, privately, and very, very successfully. You're? He nodded. I was in Denver, a series of meetings. My assistant was supposed to pick the boys up from a family friend's. Something got miscommunicated. They were walking in a blizzard, Nora said, unable to stop herself. His jaw tightened. I know, and I'm never going to forgive myself for that. Eli leaned into his side, holding on to his coat. You got here fast, she said. I drove all night. Didn't even wait for the plows. I had to see for myself. The room felt too small suddenly. I should give you a minute, she said, stepping back. But Caleb didn't move. He looked at her, really looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time. Not just the woman who found his kids, but something more. You didn't have to do any of this, he said again. Nora shrugged. They needed someone. They needed you. She shook her head, trying to brush it off, but the heat rising in her face betrayed her. I owe you, he said, voice low. And I don't just mean a thank you card. I mean something real. That's not necessary. But it is. He reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, simple, clean, heavy stock, and held it out to her. If you ever need anything, you call me. She didn't take it. I'm not looking for a handout. He smiled faintly, tired but genuine. Neither am I. The boys had started to relax again, clinging less tightly. Eli reached for the last pancake, still on the counter. Caleb looked around the cabin. The small couch, the flickering heater, the stack of nursing textbooks on the coffee table. You live here alone? Nora bristled slightly. Yeah. Why, no reason, just... He hesitated. You deserve more than this. That landed like a punch. She straightened her eyes, narrowing. I didn't do this to be rescued. His expression shifted just enough to show he'd touched something delicate. I didn't mean it like that, but the damage was done. She walked to the door and opened it wider. You should get the boys home. They're still cold. Caleb nodded once slowly, then turned to his sons. Let's go. They moved towards the door, but Eli paused at the threshold, then ran back and hugged her around the waist. Thank you, he mumbled. Nora hugged him back, her throat thick. Stay warm, okay? He nodded and followed his dad out. Caleb was the last to leave. He stopped in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. "I meant what I said," he told her softly. "I owe you more than you know." Nora didn't respond. She just watched them disappear into the snow-covered morning, her fingers curled tightly around the business card she hadn't meant to take, but somehow had. She closed the door, and for the first time in years, the cabin felt truly empty. The next morning, the cabin felt unnaturally still. Nora stood at the kitchen sink, fingers pressed into the edges of the counter, staring out at the soft white blur beyond the frosted glass. The snow had stopped overnight, blanketing everything in a clean, silent hush. A fresh start, if you looked at it one way, or a reminder of how empty her life had been until yesterday. She hadn't realized how much noise two little boys could bring. Laughter that echoed through the hall, tiny feet pounding across the floor. Eli's lopsided grin when she handed him pancakes, like he couldn't believe someone remembered what he liked. And now, nothing. Just the low hum of the heater and the ticking of the wall clock. Nora blinked hard and pulled the window closed. She had work in an hour. As she walked into the diner, Darla was already behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, wearing her usual expression, a mix of amusement and not-so-subtle curiosity. "Well, well, the storm rescuer returns," she said, raising a brow. Nora hung her coat and slid behind the counter. "Don't start. I'm just saying," Darla poured a cup and slid it over. "You take in two mystery kids during a blizzard, and the next day their father turns out to be Caleb Winslow. That's not exactly normal, Han." Nora sipped the coffee. "Nothing about my life is normal." But now it's interesting." She didn't reply. What was there to say? That she'd barely slept. That she couldn't stop thinking about the way Eli had hugged her before leaving, or how Caleb had looked at her, not with judgment, not even gratitude, but something quieter, deeper, like he'd seen something in her he wasn't expecting. Darla leaned in. "He left his card, didn't he?" Nora glanced over. "Oh, please. I've known you since you were 18. You've got internal spiral written all over your face." Nora pulled the business card from her pocket and set it on the counter between them. Darla picked it up, whistled softly. "Whew, embossed. You know a man means business when his phone number feels expensive. I'm not calling him. Why not? I didn't help his kids for a reward." "And you think calling him back makes it one?" Nora stared at the card, her jaw tightening. I don't want to step into someone else's mess." Darla softened. "Honey, we're all someone's mess. Doesn't mean we don't need each other." Before Nora could respond, the bell above the door jingled. She turned, and her stomach flipped. Caleb Winslow, in a tailored navy coat and dark jeans, walked into the diner like he'd done it 100 times. He didn't belong here, and yet somehow, he didn't look out of place. Heads turned. The regulars stared. Darla raised both brows without a word and backed into the kitchen, clearly not planning to miss a second of this. Caleb spotted Nora and walked straight to the counter. She didn't speak, just stared at him. He offered a quiet smile. Hi. I didn't know if I'd see you again. I didn't know if I'd want to see you again." That stopped him for a beat. "Then can I sit?" She nodded slowly, and he took the stool beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb said, "I thought a thank you card wouldn't cover it. You already said thank you." "I know. But there's more." Nora folded her arms. "Look, if you're here to offer me money, don't. Please." His brows furrowed. "Do I seem like the kind of man who throws money at people to make himself feel better?" She met his gaze. "I don't know what kind of man you are." He paused at that. "Fair," she sighed and turned toward him. Why are you here, Caleb? Because I couldn't stop thinking about you. That caught her off guard. She blinked. I'm not saying that to be dramatic, he continued more carefully now. You stepped into a situation without asking for anything. And when I saw the boys with you, they were safe. But more than that, they were calm, happy. I just made them pancakes, and that meant more to them than you know. A silence settled between them again. Caleb glanced at the counter, then back to her. I want to offer you something, but not out of pity or guilt. I want to find a way to keep you in their lives. If you'd want that. Her heart squeezed. I don't know if that's a good idea, she said quietly. I've been alone a long time. I'm not sure I'm built for families. But you are, he said, his voice soft but sure. You already were the moment you opened your door to them. She didn't know how to respond. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a drawing, crayon and marker. Eli's handwriting big and wobbly across the top Miss Nora's house, 2 stick figures holding hands, a red cabin, snowflakes. Nora took it carefully, her breath catching in her throat. They made it this morning, he said. Miles added the snow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the crayon lines. I don't know what you're expecting from me. I'm not expecting anything, Caleb said. I'm asking. Would you come by the house, just visit? Spend time with them. With us. She looked at him. Truly looked this time. Behind the perfect coat, the success, the headlines, there was exhaustion in his eyes. And honesty. And something she hadn't seen in a long time from anyone. Hope. I don't fit in your world, she whispered. Then maybe I need to change mine. Nora stood suddenly, the drawing still in hand. I need to get back to work. Caleb nodded, not pressing. He rose, reached into his coat pocket again, and set something on the counter before walking toward the door. She glanced down. A small white envelope. Her name written on it in careful, neat handwriting. He left without another word. The bell jingled again as the door closed behind him. Darla emerged from the kitchen the second he was gone. Okay, she breathed. That man is either in love with you or about to be. Nora didn't answer. She opened the envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten. Just one line. You saved their lives. I'd like to spend mine figuring out how to thank you. And beneath it, an address. Her hands trembled. Something had shifted. Something she hadn't asked for. But maybe had been waiting for. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Nora stood at the end of the gravel driveway, her boots crunching over leftover snow as the wind rustled through the pines. The Winslow estate loomed ahead, tall, glassy, too quiet. Clean lines, slate roof, all perched on the side of a hill that overlooked half of Missoula. She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the small gift bag she brought. Banana bread. Still warm. She didn't know why she made it, habit nerves both, but it felt like something real to carry into a place like this. As she stepped closer, the house seemed to grow, not in size exactly, but in silence. Everything here was too neat, not sterile, just untouched, like it had all been arranged by someone who didn't live in it. The front door opened before she could knock. Eli burst out first, running barefoot across the stone entry with a shout of, "Miss Nora!" Nora knelt instinctively and caught him as he flung his arms around her neck. She held him tightly, stunned by the sudden weight of him, by how familiar he already felt. "I missed you," he said into her shoulder. "I missed you too, buddy." Her voice cracked more than she expected. Behind him, Miles stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He's been waiting all morning." Nora stood still, holding Eli's hand. What about you? Miles shrugged. Maybe a little. She ruffled his hair as she stepped inside. The air smelled like cinnamon and cedar, the kind of comforting warmth she hadn't known in years. The living room stretched wide with high ceilings and soft gray furniture, but the space felt unfinished, like someone had built a perfect home, and then stepped out before filling it with life. Caleb appeared at the base of the stairs, sleeves rolled up, no jacket, just a plain navy sweater. Somehow he looked more like himself this way. Less headline, more human. He stopped when he saw her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled. "You came." "I brought banana bread," she said, holding up the bag like a peace offering. His smile widened. That's the best kind of answer. She followed him into the kitchen while the boys disappeared into the den. She heard the click of a game console, their voices rising in excitement. Caleb moved with a kind of nervous precision, offering her coffee, pointing to a stool at the kitchen island, opening cabinets, as if searching for something to do with his hands. Nora watched him. "You live here alone?" she asked finally. He glanced up. "With the boys, and my mother occasionally when she's in town. But yes, mostly alone." She nodded slowly, letting that sink in. "You don't have help. A housekeeper comes twice a week. The rest is me." He smiled faintly. "Turns out I'm pretty good at laundry." She sipped the coffee, still hot, perfectly brewed. "And pancakes?" He laughed. "That's a work in progress." There was a beat of silence before she said softly, "Why did you really invite me here?" Caleb looked at her, then really looked at her. He stepped closer, resting both hands on the counter between them. "Because I can't stop thinking about that night. About what could have happened if you hadn't been there, and not just because you kept them safe, but because they trusted you. In minutes. That doesn't happen. They were scared. They felt safe with you," he corrected. "And so did I." Nora's throat tightened. She looked away, unsure what to say to that. He didn't push. Just let the quiet settle until she looked back. "I'm not good at this," she admitted, "being needed or seen." He nodded. "Me neither." They stood there in that stillness, two people used to managing everything alone, realizing maybe they didn't have to. A voice cut through the moment. "Caleb." A woman's voice, clipped and elegant. They both turned. A tall, refined woman stepped into the kitchen. Mid-60s, sharp cheekbones, tailored coat, perfectly done hair. Her gaze landed on Nora like a question she already didn't like the answer to. "You didn't tell me you had company," she said to Caleb, eyebrows raised. He straightened. "Mother, this is Nora Fields. Nora, my mother, Joanne Winslow." Joanne extended her hand with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A pleasure." Nora shook it, trying not to shrink under the weight of that assessing stare. "You're the woman from the diner," Joanne added. "Yes, ma'am." Joanne's smile thinned slightly, like she was trying to decide whether that was quaint or concerning. "I've heard quite a bit about you. Eli can't seem to stop talking." Nora nodded. "He's a sweet boy." "Yes, sensitive. He gets that from Claire." Silence. Caleb stepped in. Nora brought banana bread. Joanne blinked. How lovely. Nora's skin prickled with the tension, too many words unspoken in the room. She set the bag gently on the counter. "I should get going." "No," Caleb said, almost too quickly. "Stay. We were going to do lunch. The boys were hoping Joanne cut in smoothly. Actually, I made a reservation at the club." Caleb's jaw shifted. The boys hate the club. I thought it might be nice for them to return to a little structure. Nora stood awkwardly between them, aware she didn't belong in this conversation, or maybe in this house at all. Joanne turned to her again, voice kind but cool. I'm sure Nora understands. You must have work. I do. Caleb looked at her apology, written in every line of his face. But before she could reassure him, Miles appeared in the doorway. You're leaving already? Nora crouched, brushing hair from his forehead. Just for now. But you just got here. Eli stood behind him, eyes wide. Caleb stepped forward. Boys, Nora can come back. Right. He looked at her like the answer mattered more than anything. She hesitated, heart pounding. I'll come back, she said softly. If that's okay? Both boys nodded furiously. Joanne remained quiet, watching everything unfold like it was a play she hadn't cast. As Nora stood to leave, Caleb walked her to the door. I'm sorry, he said under his breath. You don't have to be. She's not always like that. I'm not surprised she's protective, Nora said, glancing back. You've had a lot to protect. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I still want you here. Then you'll have to be the one who makes space. He met her eyes. I will. She nodded, once stepped onto the porch and descended the steps. Snow was starting again, soft flakes catching in her hair. Behind her, the front door stayed open for a second too long. And as it clicked closed, she felt it not rejection, but the start of something that would test them both. Something real. The next time Nora returned to the Winslow house, it wasn't snowing, but the chill in the air felt heavier than before. Like something unspoken was waiting just beyond the door. She stood outside for a second, debating whether to knock or just walk in. Caleb had texted her that morning, "Come by if you can, the boys keep asking about you." And then, after a pause, another, "So do I." It was the second message that had kept her turning over every possible excuse not to come. Still she was here. She took a breath and knocked twice. The door opened almost immediately, and Caleb stood there in a charcoal sweater sleeves pushed up again like it was his uniform. His expression softened the moment he saw her. You came. I said I would. He stepped aside, letting her in. The boys are in the backyard with Joanne. They insisted on building a snow fort. She raised a brow. She let them. She's supervising. Not participating. Of course, he chuckled, and the sound curled inside her chest like warmth. I made tea, he offered. Or coffee. Or we could go straight to wine if this turns into a "what exactly are we doing" kind of conversation. Nora gave him a look. Let's start with tea. He nodded, guiding her to the kitchen. It smelled like citrus and cinnamon again, too perfect, like the scent was piped in. As he poured hot water into ceramic mugs, Nora leaned against the counter watching him. So she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. How's the family diplomacy going? Caleb gave her a dry look. She didn't expect me to call you back. And yet here I am? He nodded slowly. She'll get used to it. Nora looked down into her tea, her voice quieter. What about you? I'm already used to it, he said without missing a beat. The honesty in his tone made her breath catch for a second. Before she could answer, the back door swung open, and the boys rushed in, boots clomping across the tile, red-cheeked and beaming. Eli launched himself at her legs like a missile. You smell like oranges, Miles said, nose wrinkling. Is that the tea? She laughed, kneeling to help peel off Eli's gloves. Yep. Want some? Eli shook his head. We want to show you the fort. Come see Let Her Breathe first, Caleb said gently, guiding the boys back with a soft laugh. Go get cleaned up, and maybe she'll join you later. They groaned, but obeyed, tromping down the hall. Joanne followed a moment later, stepping in with her coat still buttoned and hair perfectly smooth despite the breeze outside. Miss Fields, she greeted coolly. Mrs. Winslow Nora replied with equal civility. Caleb looked between them with barely concealed tension. I was just telling Nora how much the boys wanted her to visit again, he said, trying to ease the air. Yes, well, Joanne slipped off her gloves. Children grow attached quickly when they're missing stability. Nora stiffened slightly. Or when someone makes them feel seen. Joanne's smile didn't falter. Of course, and I imagine this all feels very new to you. Caleb stepped in. Mother. I only mean, Joanne continued, it must be overwhelming, this kind of household, these expectations. It's quite different from working a diner shift, isn't it? Nora placed her tea gently on the counter. I've had my share of hard days, she said calmly. And I'm not here to impress anyone, least of all you. Joanne arched a brow. Is that so? I'm here because 2 boys trust me, and because your son asked me to be. Caleb cleared his throat. Let's take a breath. Joanne gave him a long look, then smiled thinly at Nora. I suppose we all have our roles. And with that, she swept out of the kitchen. The silence left behind was thick. Caleb leaned against the counter, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I'm sorry. Nora shook her head. Don't be. She's protecting what she knows. I get it. I didn't bring you here to be scrutinized. I know. You brought me here to spend time with the boys. That's what I'm doing. He looked at her like he wanted to say more, but she turned and walked toward the back door. Outside, the sun was starting to lower, casting golden light across the yard. The boys had built an uneven but enthusiastic snow fort near the pine trees, complete with a flag made from a stick and someone's sock. They spotted her and shouted in victory, racing over. Come see, come see! She let them drag her across the yard, laughing as she nearly slipped on the packed snow. From the kitchen window, Caleb watched arms crossed the weight in his chest, somewhere between awe and fear. He hadn't expected her to fit so quickly. He hadn't expected to want her to. Inside, Joanne stepped beside him. She's not your future, Caleb, she said quietly. He didn't look at her. No, he said. She's something better. Joanne said nothing. But the crease between her brows deepened as she watched Nora kneel in the snow, helping the boys rebuild one of the crumbled walls with her bare hands, not caring about the cold, not caring about anything except the 2 small voices beside her. And in that moment, Caleb knew this wasn't a kindness. It was the beginning of everything. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting a soft amber glow over the pine trees. Nora sat cross-legged in the snow beside the lopsided fort, her jeans soaked through at the knees, her gloves damp and useless. Eli had just crowned her Queen of the Snow Kingdom using a pinecone scepter, and Miles was explaining the fort's defense strategy with a seriousness that made her bite back a smile. She hadn't laughed like this in years. Not the polite, strained chuckles she gave customers when they asked how she was doing. Not the nervous laughter that came when life surprised her in bad ways. This was different. Warm. Real. From somewhere she'd forgotten existed. You're really good with them, Caleb said softly from behind her. She turned, brushing snow from her sleeves. He was leaning against a tree, arms crossed, watching her like she was a moment he didn't want to forget. I don't know about that, she said, standing slowly and wiping her hands on her coat. They're just easy to love. Caleb nodded his smile, thoughtful. They haven't been easy for a lot of people. Nora looked back towards the boys. Eli was now trying to convince Miles to let him throw a snowball at one of the trees to test the wind. They looked like any other kids. Happy. Safe. They trust you, Caleb added. They want to, she said, her voice soft. That's different. Kids will pour themselves into anyone who shows up. But someone has to stay. He didn't reply right away. I didn't mean that as a jab, she said quickly. Just, I've seen it. People come and go. It messes with them. He looked down, his jaw tightening. I've tried. I know. She hesitated. And I believe you. Caleb walked a little closer, hands in his coat pockets now. I want to be better at this, not just for them, for me. You're already doing better than most. They stood in silence for a beat, snowflakes beginning to drift again from the skylight and slow. He turned toward her, searching her expression. Would you stay for dinner? She looked up. I didn't come here to be part of your world. Caleb, I don't want you to be part of my world, he said gently. I want to build one where you fit. She blinked, something catching in her chest. That sounds a lot like a line, she said, trying to soften the weight of it. It's not. I don't do this. I don't say things to win people over. No, she whispered. You just rescue them with tea and backyard snowball fights. His smile faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. I don't know what this is yet, but I know I don't want to stop finding out. Nora felt the ground shift under her, not physically, but deep inside, like something had opened that had been sealed for too long. I'll stay, she said quietly, but only if I help cook. He laughed. Deal. Inside the kitchen, filled with the scent of roasted vegetables and garlic bread, Caleb opened a bottle of wine after a hesitant glance and a muttered, "It's from the nice shelf, just in case this is a date," and Nora sautéed spinach in a pan while the boys set the table with mismatched silverware. It was domestic. Unbelievably perfectly domestic. Halfway through dinner, while Eli talked about space stations and Miles complained about school lunches, Nora caught Caleb watching her again. She couldn't read his expression. It was part admiration, part wonder, and something heavier beneath it. Something like longing, but steadier, like he was remembering something he'd lost and realizing he wanted it again. After the boys were in bed, Miles insisting she read just one chapter of a mystery novel he loved, and Eli falling asleep with his head in her lap. Nora padded back into the living room, where Caleb was cleaning up the dishes. He handed her a towel without a word. They worked quietly side by side until the last plate was dry. Then, as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. She used to be like you, he said. Nora froze. Claire. He nodded slowly. She could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they belonged there, even when they didn't. Nora stepped closer, the towel still in her hand. You miss her. I do, he said, looking up at her. But not like you think. I miss what we had, the family, the possibility. We were partners, not perfect, not even all that romantic by the end, but she was my best friend. Nora nodded, something aching in her throat. I'm not her Caleb. I know. That's not what I want. He stepped forward, close now, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the space hum between them. What do you want? He didn't answer right away. Then I want you to keep showing up. That's all. Nora swallowed. That's a dangerous thing to ask. He smiled, small and honest. Only if you say yes. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the polished billionaire, not the man from the newspaper headlines, but the father who read bedtime stories. The man who cooked too much pasta because he didn't trust the portions on the box. The man who watched her like she was light in a place that had gone dim for too long. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. Neither moved, neither had to. The moment held. And for the first time in years, Nora let herself hope. The following morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through her cabin windows. The snow outside had softened overnight, covering the world in a glittering stillness that made everything feel quieter, like even the birds had paused to take a breath. But she hadn't slept well. Not because of discomfort, but because something inside her was restless now. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caleb standing in his kitchen looking at her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask until now. That look stayed with her long after she left, after the dishes were done, after the good nights and half-smiles. She poured coffee into her chipped mug and sat by the window, her mind already turning. What was this thing growing between them? It wasn't a fling. It wasn't pity. It wasn't just gratitude. It felt like something sturdy beginning to form. Quiet. Unexpected. But real. She sipped her coffee and tried not to let it scare her. Later that day, as the dinner shift at the diner slowed to a lull, Nora found herself wiping down tables with more focus than usual. Darla watched from behind the counter, arms crossed. "You've been humming," she said. Nora froze, cloth mid-swipe. "What you're humming? That means one of two things: you either finally fixed the heater in your cabin, or someone put a dent in your walls." Nora shot her a look. "Don't start. I'm not judging. I'm observing." Darla poured herself a cup of coffee, taking a long sip before continuing. "It's the Winslow guy, isn't it?" Nora didn't answer. "You're not the first woman who's thought she could swim in deeper waters than she's used to." Nora turned around slowly. "I'm not trying to swim anywhere. I just care about the boys." "And he's trying." Darla's expression softened. "I know. I'm not saying don't feel something. I'm saying be ready for when the temperature changes." Nora opened her mouth to respond, but the bell above the door chimed. She turned and froze. Joanne Winslow stood just inside the diner, elegant as ever, in a long camel coat and leather gloves, her presence like a sudden drop in temperature. Darla raised a brow. "Well, speak of the snowstorm." Joanne's heels clicked softly as she approached. "Miss Fields, may we speak in private?" Nora glanced at Darla, who immediately found a reason to disappear into the kitchen. She gestured towards the booth in the back. "Sure." They sat across from each other. Joanne removed her gloves slowly, like she had all the time in the world. "I thought it best we have this conversation without the boys or Caleb present." Nora folded her hands on the table. "All right." Joanne tilted her head. "I believe you care about my grandsons. And I don't doubt you helped them when they needed it. For that, I'm grateful." Nora waited. She knew a but was coming. But Joanne continued, "You must understand that my family lives in a very specific world, one that does not often accommodate sudden entanglements." Nora's heart clenched, but her face remained calm. "Is that what you think this is? An entanglement?" Joanne's expression didn't change. "I think you're a good woman. But kindness doesn't equal compatibility. You may believe what's happening between you and my son is simple, even romantic. But our world is built on more than affection." Nora leaned back, eyes steady. "What exactly are you afraid of? That my grandsons will get attached to someone who has no intention or ability to stay?" Nora swallowed. "I never made them any promises." "No, but you've been showing up. That's its own kind of promise, isn't it?" Joanne set her gloves back on the table, smoothing them carefully. "I came today because I don't believe in secrets or surprises. If you stay, if you keep spending time with them with Caleb, there will be attention, questions, assumptions, and eventually disappointment, for everyone." Nora's voice was low, and if I walk away now, Joanne looked up, something almost kind in her eyes. "Then I'll make sure you're taken care of. Quietly. Generously." There it was. Nora's stomach twisted, but her voice never wavered. "You think I want money. I think you want peace. And that won't come from walking into our lives any deeper." Nora stood slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. "I don't care about your name, or your money, or the life you've built on rules and curated expectations." She leaned in slightly. "I care about two boys who knock on my door like it's the safest place in the world. And I care about a man who's trying to be more than what you raised him to be." Joanne blinked, but said nothing. Nora continued, her voice steady. "If you think I'd walk away because you're scared of what this might turn into, then you don't know me at all." Joanne stood, her chin lifted. "I suppose we'll see." She turned and walked out, her coat billowing behind her like a warning. Nora stood in place for a long time after. When Darla returned, she raised a brow. "Well, she tried to buy me off," Nora said quietly. Darla let out a low whistle. "Now that's romance in the 21st century." Nora shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't expect it to feel this personal. That means it's real." Nora looked down at her hands. And for the first time since meeting Caleb, she wasn't afraid of what it meant to stay. She was afraid of what it would mean to walk away. It was almost dark when Nora pulled into the long drive leading to the Winslow estate. The sky was a deepening blue, the snow catching the last light like flecks of gold scattered across the ground. Her breath fogged in the chilled air as she sat in her car, hands still on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the front door. She'd nearly turned around twice on the way over, not because she was unsure of Caleb or the boys, but because of the conversation that still echoed in her head. Joanne Winslow's voice, calm and calculated, had cut deeper than she expected. Not with cruelty, but with certainty. As if Nora's place in this world had already been decided before she ever walked in. But Nora had made a choice. And she wasn't going to disappear just because someone thought she didn't belong. She climbed the porch steps slowly, heart ticking like a clock. Before she could knock, the door opened. Caleb stood there, surprise quickly shifting to relief. "I was just about to call you. I figured I'd save you the trouble." He stepped aside, letting her in. She walked past him and into the familiar warmth, the smell of roasted vegetables and rosemary in the air again. "The boys are in the den," he said, closing the door behind her. "They've built some kind of indoor fort. It's intense." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like them." Caleb watched her as she took off her coat, his gaze searching. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then turned to face him fully. "Your mother came to the diner today?" His body stiffened. "What did she say?" "She asked me to walk away, offered to make it worth my while." He shut his eyes for a moment, jaw clenched. "I'm so sorry." "She's scared," Nora said gently. "And I get it. You've built something she wants to protect." He walked toward her, slow and careful, like he was trying not to spook something fragile. "She doesn't speak for me, and she sure as hell doesn't speak for the boys." "I know." She swallowed hard. "But if we're going to do this, whatever this is, we need to be honest. I didn't come here for a fantasy, or a rescue." Caleb stopped a few feet in front of her, his voice quiet. "Neither did I." They stood there, both bracing against the weight of what came next. "I'm not a woman who fits into a world of charity galas and trust funds," Nora said. "And I'm not looking for someone to pull me out of the life I've built. I don't want to pull you out of it," he replied. "I want to be part of it, if you'll let me." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. There wasn't any. "I'm still scared," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Me too. That's how you know it's real." The sound of laughter echoed down the hall, followed by the unmistakable crash of something toppling over. Nora turned her head toward it, eyebrows raised. Caleb chuckled. That was either a couch cushion rebellion or Eli testing gravity again. They walked together towards the den. The boys had created a masterpiece, pillows, blankets, chairs, all arranged in a chaotic sort of dome, with flashlights lighting the inside. Miles popped his head out. "We have a secret code to enter." Nora knelt down, smiling. What is it? Eli whispered something into Miles's ear, who grinned and said, "You have to say banana bread forever." Obviously, she said serious as stone, "Banana bread forever." They pulled her inside like royalty. She crawled in beside them, feeling the warmth of the flashlights, and the boys' joy radiate around her like a little sun. Caleb stayed at the edge, crouching beside the entrance. "You're allowed in," Miles said. "You're the king. I thought I was the guy who buys too many throw pillows." Eli laughed. "You can be both inside that makeshift kingdom of blankets and laughter." Nora felt something shift again. Not everything had to be grand to be good. Not every life-changing moment came wrapped in perfection. Some came in forts lit by flashlights built by children who'd learned too young what it meant to lose something. After an hour of stories and silly games, Nora and Caleb stepped out into the hallway while the boys rebuilt their fortress for Phase 2. Caleb leaned against the wall, his voice low. "They love you." She looked down. "That scares me more than anything. Why?" "Because love makes things fragile." Caleb gently took her hand. "Or maybe love's the only thing that makes them strong." She looked up at him. "You really mean that I mean all of this, every second?" She nodded, heart full to the brim. Then a sound echoed from down the hall, a knock at the front door. Caleb glanced toward it, frowning. "It's late." He walked to answer it, Nora trailing behind him cautiously. As the door swung open, a woman stood silhouetted in the porch light. Her coat was thin, her eyes tired. "Caleb," she said, voice shaking. He stared at her, confusion flickering into shock. "Danny." The woman nodded, lips trembling. "I need help," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I should have come sooner." Nora's breath caught, because behind Danny, barely visible in the shadows, was another child. Maybe 5 years old. Clutching her hand, eyes wide. And just like that, the world tilted again. Not backward, not forward, but into something none of them saw coming. The porch light flickered softly as the wind picked up, rattling the chimes by the door. Caleb stood frozen, his hand still on the doorknob, eyes locked on the woman in front of him. Nora didn't move either. Danny. Nora had heard her name before, once, maybe twice, when Caleb mentioned Claire's old friend. The one who'd said she would take the boys who never showed. The one they'd stopped waiting for. And now she was standing here, small and thin, eyes hollowed by exhaustion, and something else. Regret. The little girl beside her clung tighter to Danny's hand, peeking out from behind her coat with quiet, watchful eyes. Caleb's voice, when it came, was low, guarded. "What are you doing here? I didn't know where else to go," Danny said, her voice cracking. "I've been in Arizona. I was staying with someone. Things got bad. And I knew I should have come sooner, but I didn't know how to fix it. Then I saw you on the news about the boys, the snowstorm, the whole thing. And I just—" She broke off, blinking fast. The little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, I'm cold." Nora's heart sank. Without thinking, she opened the door wider. "Come in." Caleb looked at her, startled. But he stepped back too. Danny hesitated a moment, then nodded and ushered the little girl inside. They moved slowly, like people who had walked too far with too little. The girl's shoes were soaked, one of her gloves missing. Nora knelt and helped her peel off the wet layers, her fingers trembling as she worked. "What's her name?" Nora asked gently. "Her name's Sophie Danny," said, eyes flicking toward Caleb. Sophie looked up, voice barely above a whisper. "Hi." Nora smiled softly. "Hi, sweetheart." Caleb still hadn't moved far from the door. His eyes stayed on Danny like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't remember owning. "You were supposed to take them," he said finally. "After Claire. After everything. You said you'd come?" You said you'd help." "I know," Danny whispered. "I did, and I meant it. But then life happened, and I messed up Caleb. I got scared. I didn't think I could do it alone. You didn't even call. I know," she repeated lower this time. "I failed them, and I live with that every single day." Silence fell over the room, heavy and full. Nora stood and stepped beside Caleb, not touching him, but grounding the moment. "You have a daughter," Caleb said. Danny nodded. "She's mine. Her dad's gone. It's just us." Caleb looked down at Sophie, who now stood by the fireplace, warming her hands, small shoulders rising and falling, like she didn't want to take up space. "You're here because—" "I don't want anything from you," Danny said quickly. "I swear, I'm not here to take them. I know I gave up that right. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't come for a second chance. I came because Sophie needs somewhere safe, just for a few nights." Nora could see the war on Caleb's face. Every word she said chipped at something in him. Old trust, deep betrayal, maybe both. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said finally. "I wouldn't trust me either," Danny replied. "But I swear to you, she's just a little girl. She's not part of the past. She didn't choose any of this." Caleb's jaw flexed. "She can stay," Nora said softly. He turned toward her, surprised again. Nora met his eyes. "The boys don't need more people disappearing on them, and that little girl doesn't deserve to be punished for what someone else didn't do." Danny's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Nora said. "Thank them if this works out." Caleb finally nodded, slow and reluctant. "One night. We'll figure it out tomorrow." Danny exhaled shakily and led Sophie to the guest room, apologizing again under her breath. Nora watched her disappear down the hall, then turned to Caleb. "You okay?" He stared at the fire for a long moment before answering. "I honestly don't know." She waited, giving him space. When he finally looked at her, his face was unreadable. "You always know the right thing to do." "No," she said quietly. "I just try to do the next kind thing. That's not always the same." He sat on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "How do I even explain this to the boys?" Nora sat beside him. Carefully. Honestly. They deserve the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. He nodded, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. This was the woman Claire trusted, he said, voice raw. The one she picked if something ever happened. And she just disappeared. "And now she's back," Nora said. "And we don't know why. Not really. But you didn't slam the door. That matters." He glanced at her. "What if this ruins everything?" "It won't," she said softly. "Not if we hold it together." A quiet knock came from the hallway. It was Miles. He peeked in his face, cautious. "Who's the little girl?" Caleb stood. "Come here, bud." Miles walked in, glancing between them. "That's Sophie," Caleb said. "She's Danny's daughter." Danny, Miles repeated, like testing the name on his tongue. "Mom's friend?" "Yeah." Miles looked at Nora. "Is she staying for tonight?" she said gently. Miles nodded slowly. "Okay." He didn't ask more. He didn't run. He just climbed up onto the couch, curled against Caleb's side, and said, "I hope she's not sad anymore." Caleb blinked fast. "Me too, buddy." Eli wandered in a few moments later, rubbing his eyes. Sophie peeked out from the hallway, holding a blanket. And somehow by the time the fire dimmed and the clock ticked past midnight, the living room had become a quiet mess of tangled blankets and shared space. No one had planned for it. But it felt somehow like a beginning anyway. The morning sun poured into the living room through the wide bay windows, casting streaks of gold across the hardwood floor. A quiet hum buzzed from the kitchen, a soft kettle whistle, the low clink of cups being set down. For a house that had weathered surprise guests and buried emotions just the night before, it felt almost peaceful. Nora stood barefoot at the stove, warming milk for the kids and pouring coffee for herself and Caleb. The boys were still asleep on the couch under a pile of blankets, limbs tangled together with Sophie's small form nestled between them. Caleb entered the kitchen quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. His hair was tousled, his sweater slightly askew. For once he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a dad one with too much on his mind and not enough sleep behind his eyes. "You're up early," Nora said, handing him a mug. "Didn't sleep much." "Same." She leaned against the counter, watching him. "You thinking about Danny?" He nodded. "She's still asleep in the guest room. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like she'll vanish again and leave more pieces behind for us to pick up." "She might," Nora said honestly. "But that's not on you. Or the kids." Caleb took a long sip of coffee. "I keep asking myself if I'm doing the right thing letting her stay. You're doing the kind thing she said. And that's enough for now." They stood in silence for a moment before the soft creak of footsteps echoed down the hall. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her eyes still sleepy, one sock missing. She held a stuffed animal tight in one arm. "Hi," she whispered. Nora smiled gently. "Good morning, sweetheart. You hungry?" Sophie nodded slowly. Caleb crouched to her level. "We've got waffles or cereal. Your pick." She hesitated, then whispered, "Waffles." "You got it." They made breakfast together. Caleb manned the waffle iron, while Nora poured juice and sliced fruit. Sophie sat at the table, shy but alert, as if the warmth of the house was still foreign to her. When the boys finally stumbled in, hair sticking up in all directions, they didn't question her presence. Eli waved sleepily while Miles handed her a crayon from the art box on the table. And just like that, the rhythm of the house bent again, gently, seamlessly around someone new. Later that morning, while the kids played in the den, Caleb and Nora stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was crisp, the snow starting to melt in patches. Caleb leaned against the railing, his breath clouding in front of him. "I don't know how this keeps happening," he said. "Every time I think I have a handle on things, something shifts." "That's life," Nora replied. "It doesn't care if you've planned for it. It just shows up anyway." He looked over at her. "You didn't sign up for this. Chaos, unexpected guests, emotional landmines." "No," she said quietly. "But I'm still here." His eyes softened. "I need to tell you something," he said. She turned fully toward him. "Okay, I had a meeting with the board yesterday before Danny showed up. They want me back in San Francisco. Permanently." The words hung between them like a cold gust. Nora's chest tightened. "What did you say?" I said no, for now. He looked down at his hands. "But I can't keep dodging them. The company's not just some office job, it's everything I built. And they've been patient, but the clock's ticking." She nodded slowly. "So what happens next?" "That's the part I don't know." He looked at her, voice low. "But I don't want to go if it means losing this, losing you." Nora's heart raced, but she stayed steady. "I can't follow you into that world, Caleb. You know that. I'm not asking you to." He stepped closer. "But I'm also not ready to give this up just because life's inconvenient." She searched his eyes, every word he spoke, threading into her. "We can't keep pretending this is a pause button on real life. The boys have school. You have obligations. And me, I've got a paycheck-to-paycheck existence that doesn't fit into boardrooms or black-tie events. Then we build something in the middle," he said. "Somewhere in between all that noise." She smiled faintly, though the fear was still there. "Middle grounds are messy. Yeah," he said. "But they're worth fighting for." Just then, the sliding door opened behind them. Danny stood there wrapped in a borrowed sweater, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Can I talk to you both?" she asked. They nodded, following her inside. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug. Her voice was thin but clear. "I've been thinking all night. I know I caused a lot of pain. and I can't fix what I broke. But Sophie deserves a chance to be somewhere safe, even if that means not with me." Nora and Caleb exchanged a glance. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully. "I want to find a job, a place, stability, but until I do, would you let her stay here?" Caleb blinked. "You'd leave her, I'd visit, often. But she needs more than I can give her right now." Her voice cracked. "And I can't be proud at the expense of her future." Nora's heart ached. Sophie peeked in from the hallway, watching from a distance. Caleb exhaled slowly. "We'd take care of her, like she's our own." Danny nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know you would." She stood wiping her face. "I'll go tomorrow." "You don't have to rush," Nora said gently. "I do," Danny said. "For her sake." That night after dinner, Sophie curled up on the couch with the boys' head resting on Eli's shoulder. Miles draped a blanket over them all without a word. Nora and Caleb stood nearby, watching the quiet scene unfold. He reached for her hand. "I don't know what we're becoming," he said softly. "But I know I don't want it to stop." She squeezed his fingers. "Then don't." Snow began to fall again that morning light, at first almost too delicate to notice, like the sky was trying not to disturb anything already on the ground. The kids were still asleep, tangled in blankets and dreams, while the house breathed quiet. Nora sat alone in the kitchen, her fingers curled around a half-warm mug, staring at the steam curling into the air. Her reflection blinked back at her from the window, tired eyes heartful and yet unsettled. It was the moment she hadn't wanted to come, the moment when the good days started feeling like borrowed time. She heard Caleb's footsteps before he said anything. He walked in slowly, a file tucked under his arm, a tightness in his jaw she recognized immediately. He wasn't bringing coffee. He wasn't here to flirt or smile or ask how she slept. He set the file on the table between them. And that was all it took. Nora didn't touch it. "What is it?" "The board sent a revised agreement last night. They want me to take the permanent role. CEO, based in San Francisco." Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. "You already told them no." "I did," he said quietly. "But this offer, it's different. It's everything I ever built coming back under my control. They're offering full autonomy. And the boy's future, it's secure." She finally looked at the folder. Sleek, weighty, like it had already decided everything. "And us?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He sat across from her. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Nora blinked hard, her throat thick. "Do you want to go?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to leave this," he finally said. "You. Them. This whole version of life that somehow became the only thing I look forward to. But you also don't know how to stay," she said, voice soft. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes tired. "If I stay, I lose the company. If I go, I lose this." "No." Her voice cracked, but she straightened. "You don't lose us. But you do have to choose the version of your life you're willing to fight for." He looked up, stricken. "I've fought for a lot, Caleb," she said. "And I've learned the hard way there's no such thing as having it all. There's only what matters most." A long silence stretched between them. Only the sound of the fridge humming and the whisper of snow hitting glass. "You and the kids," he said, "finally you matter the most. Then prove it." Her words weren't sharp. They were broken. Honest. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it but didn't squeeze back. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. "Especially not to them. They don't need a maybe. They need someone who stays. I want to stay. Then you have to mean it more than you mean everything else." They sat there like that for a while. neither moving, caught in the stillness of a moment that would shape everything that followed. Later, after Caleb left to walk the woods, his way of thinking, Nora stayed with the kids. Sophie was quiet, building towers out of cereal boxes. Eli begged her to play space chef, and Miles was curled up on the couch with a book twice his age. It should have been peaceful. But the weight in her chest made everything feel heavier. She was washing dishes when Joanne called. The name flashing on her phone felt like a test. She answered. "Hello. I assume Caleb told you about the offer." Nora dried her hands, staring out the window. "He did." There was a pause. Then, "He belongs in San Francisco, Miss Fields, not hiding in a mountain cabin." Nora's grip on the towel tightened. "He's not hiding. He's raising his sons. He's finding himself again. You've made him soft. He's healing." Another silence. Then Joanne's voice changed just enough to feel real. "He gave up everything once for them. I was there. I watched him lose himself. And now he has a chance to rebuild. I'm not the reason he's hesitating," Nora said firmly. "He loves those boys. And maybe he wants more than boardrooms and quarterly reports." Joanne sighed. "Then you'd better decide if you're going with him." The line went dead. Nora stood still for a long time. She knew what was coming. And something told her that tomorrow everything would change. Nora stood at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching as the sky thickened with gray. Snow hadn't started falling yet, but it would. You could feel it in the air, that silent tension before the sky decided to let go. The kids were inside playing with cardboard castles and paper crowns. Danny had come by earlier, dropping off a bag of Sophie's clothes and some coloring books. She'd stayed long enough to kiss her daughter's forehead and whisper something too soft for Nora to hear. Then she'd left. No promises, no scenes, just a tired smile and the quiet dignity of someone trying to do better, even if it was too late for a clean slate. Now it was just Nora, waiting. She heard Caleb's car before she saw it. The SUV rolled up the driveway slowly, its headlights flickering through the thinning light. He parked, climbed out, and stood there for a moment like he wasn't sure whether to come closer. Nora didn't move. She needed to see what kind of man was walking toward her this time. He approached carefully, his coat, open scarf hanging loose like everything about him was undone. "I went," he said, "to the Ridge Trail, to the city." Nora's heart skipped. "You drove to San Francisco just for the day. I needed to feel it again. The buildings, the noise, the tension in the air. It used to charge me, make me feel like I mattered. And now," he looked at her eyes, heavy. "Now it just makes me feel like I'm pretending." She swallowed, watching him. "So what are you saying?" Caleb stepped up onto the porch, close enough to touch, but still holding space between them. "I walked into that boardroom. The same one where I once made decisions that changed hundreds of lives. I looked at the table, the people, the numbers. And all I could think was, none of them know the sound of Eli's laugh when he's trying to tell a lie. None of them know how Miles reads upside down when he's nervous. None of them would look twice at Sophie if she sat in a corner drawing with her knees pulled to her chest." His voice cracked just slightly. "None of them would understand how you take broken people and make them feel whole again." Nora blinked hard. "Caleb." "I told them no," he said, "for good." The wind stirred around them. Nora's breath caught. "They told me I was wasting my potential," he continued, "that I was throwing away the kind of legacy men dream about." He reached for her hand. "But I realized, the legacy I want is in that house. It's in bedtime stories and pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and learning how to argue without raising your voice." She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in yet either. "I don't have a perfect plan," he said. "I'm not promising this will be easy. But I'm not walking away again. Not from them. And not from you. Nora felt something inside her crack, wide open. You really mean that she whispered? He nodded. Every word. She looked down at their hands, then up again, eyes shining. Then I need to tell you something too. He waited. I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid of letting myself want something more than survival. Afraid of trusting that someone could stay, that someone would, I get it. But the kids, you, this house, it's more than I ever thought I'd have. He exhaled a tremble behind it. Then let's keep it. All of it. She smiled, finally stepping into his arms, her head resting against his chest. The door creaked open behind them. Are you guys hugging? Miles called out. Caleb turned, laughing. Yeah, buddy. We're hugging. You coming inside? It's almost cocoa time, be right there. Nora called back, her voice light, with something new. When the door shut again, she looked up at Caleb. So what now? He grinned. Now we figure out how to build a life that fits us both. And what if we mess it up? He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Then we'll fix it. Together. The first snowflake fell between them, silent and slow, melting before it touched the porch. Nora didn't look away from him. You're really staying. I'm home, he said. For good. And this time, she believed him. The house smelled like cinnamon and warm sugar. Nora had baked 2 loaves of banana bread that morning, and Miles had insisted on pouring the chocolate chips in himself, half of which landed on the counter, the floor, and somehow inside Sophie's shirt. No one complained. Snow blanketed the yard again, thick and undisturbed. It had been 2 days since Caleb told the board goodbye, since he told her he was staying. But it still felt like a dream she might wake up from. She stood in the living room now, folding clean laundry, while the kids scattered puzzle pieces across the rug. Sophie leaned on her elbow, fitting corner pieces together like she'd done it 100 times before. Eli was building a spaceship out of Legos in the same room, humming to himself. Miles kept running back and forth from the kitchen, sneaking pieces of the still warm banana bread. Nora couldn't help but smile. Then the doorbell rang. Her heart jumped, not out of fear, but because unexpected knocks had a way of pulling old anxieties to the surface. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. When she opened it, Joanne Winslow stood there, tall, composed, wrapped in a gray wool coat with matching gloves, her eyes sharp as ever, but this time there was something softer in them, something like hesitation. Nora blinked. Mrs. Winslow. Joanne gave a small nod. Nora. The silence hung between them for a beat. Then Joanne spoke. May I come in? Nora glanced over her shoulder. The kids were still occupied the house, warm and alive with the sound of everyday life. She stepped aside. Of course. Joanne walked in slowly, taking in the space. Her eyes fell on a drawing taped to the wall Sophie had made it last night. A rainbow house, 3 kids, 2 grown-ups, and a dog none of them owned. Underneath it, in uneven marker, our home. Joanne studied it for a long moment, then turned. I won't stay long, she said. Would you like some tea? Joanne hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. Nora moved to the kitchen, heart steady, but guarded. She poured the tea, hands calm, measured. As she returned, Joanne had taken a seat at the small dining table. Nora placed the cup in front of her. Joanne looked up. Thank you. They sat in silence for a few moments. 2 women who had walked through entirely different lives, now sharing the same complicated family. Joanne broke the silence first. I spent a long time believing love was something you earned through control. That if you made enough money, enough structure, you could keep the people you cared about safe from chaos. She ran her thumb along the rim of the cup. When Caleb left the city, I thought he was running, failing, turning his back on the future we'd built. Nora sat still listening. But when I saw him here, with the boys with you, I realized he wasn't running. He was choosing something better, something real. Nora blinked, surprised. I've made mistakes, Joanne said, voice softer now. I tried to protect my son by controlling him. I thought if I pushed hard enough he'd see things my way, but he's always seen more than I gave him credit for. Joanne met Nora's eyes. And he sees you, not as a charity case, not as a phase, but as home. Emotion welled in Nora's chest, but she didn't let it spill. He told you Nora asked, that he turned down the board, yes, and that he's choosing this life, with you, with the children. Nora nodded slowly. I came here, Joanne continued, not to lecture, or to offer money. I came to say, thank you. That stopped Nora cold. For what? For catching him, Joanne said, when the rest of us let him fall. A breath passed between them. I don't expect us to become close, Joanne said, standing now, but I hope if you'll allow it that I can be part of the children's lives. Respectfully. Quietly. Nora stood too. Her voice was steady, kind. If you show up with your heart open, there's room here. Joanne's eyes glistened just briefly. I'll do my best. They walked to the door. The wind had picked up again, brushing snow off the porch rails. Joanne paused before stepping out. One more thing, she said. Caleb doesn't need my approval. But I'll say it anyway, he's making the right choice. Nora nodded, her throat tight. I know. Joanne stepped out into the snow and disappeared down the walk. Nora closed the door, leaned against it for just a second, and exhaled. Then Caleb's voice called from the top of the stairs. Everything okay? She turned to see him standing there, hair a mess, holding a laundry basket like it was his badge of domestic honor. Nora smiled. Yeah, everything's more than okay. He grinned. The banana bread's already half gone. She walked toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Good. That means they're happy. Caleb kissed her forehead, holding her close. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside they were warm. Together, building something no boardroom could offer, something messier, louder, and infinitely more real. The town's holiday lights twinkled across Main Street like 1,000 tiny stars. Nora stood just outside the bakery, bundled in a thick scarf, hands tucked deep into her coat pockets as the late December air brushed against her cheeks. Around her, people bustled from shop to shop, laughter rising like music above the snow-dusted sidewalks. She glanced across the street. Through the front window of the bookstore, Caleb stood with Sophie on his shoulders, her mittened hands patting his hair as she pointed to a glittery snow globe on a high shelf. Miles and Eli were beside them, huddled over a table of comic books. They looked like any other family. But Nora knew the road it had taken to get here. The last few weeks had been filled with small, quiet choices, the kind that didn't make headlines but mattered more than anything. Caleb showing up for teacher conferences. Nora switching her shifts to be home for dinner. Sophie learning how to sleep through the night without asking if her mom was coming back. And today was the first day it all felt real. She crossed the street just as Caleb stepped outside, balancing Sophie with practiced ease. She's convinced we need a third snow globe, he said with a grin. Nora laughed. Of course she is. Sophie giggled, then leaned down to whisper something in Caleb's ear. He looked at Nora, eyebrows raised. She wants to know if you're going to be her mom now. Nora's heart skipped. She looked up at Sophie, whose eyes were wide and unsure but filled with hope. Nora reached up and brushed a stray curl from her forehead. I think, she said softly, I already am. Sophie's face lit up. Caleb's arm tightened around her legs, pulling her in close. The moment was simple, but Nora would remember it forever. They walked together down the street, the kids rushing ahead to the corner where the tree lighting would happen soon. The square was filling up fast, families huddled together, couples sipping cocoa, the local choir warming up with soft carols. Nora leaned into Caleb as they stood near the tree. "This still feels unreal sometimes." "I know," he said, voice low. "But I'd choose it 100 times over." She looked at him. "Even with the mess, especially with the mess." The mayor stepped up to the mic, calling for attention. Lights dimmed around the square, and a hush fell. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The tree burst to life in a spray of gold and white, the crowd erupting in cheers. Eli whooped. Miles clapped like he couldn't help it. Sophie let out a tiny gasp, her mouth open in awe. And Nora. She felt the warmth of it settle in her bones. Afterward, they meandered through the booths, handmade ornaments, hot cider, a petting zoo tucked behind the old fire station. Someone handed Nora a cup of mulled wine, and she sipped it slowly, letting herself enjoy every second. Caleb bought a pair of silly snowman hats for the kids. Miles rolled his eyes, but wore it anyway. Eli insisted his had magical powers. Sophie wore hers like a crown. As the evening wound down, Caleb turned to Nora with a strange look in his eyes. What she asked, smiling. "Come with me." He took her hand and led her behind the old church where the crowd had thinned the lights dimmer. He stopped beneath a bare oak tree, the snow under their boots crunching gently. "I've been carrying something around," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. Nora's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. She stared at it. Caleb. He opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring. Not flashy, not perfect, but real. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, or even next month. I'm asking you to believe in where this is going. I'm asking you to wear this as a promise, not from some billionaire who lost everything, but from the man who found everything he didn't know he was missing in you." Her eyes filled tears hot against the cold. "I know this life isn't shiny," he said. "But it's ours, and I want to build it with you." Nora looked at him, at the man who had once been a headline, and now stood here asking for her heart, not as a rescue, but as a partner. She took the ring, slipping it onto her finger. "Then let's build it." Caleb pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead, as the snow began to fall again. In the distance, the kids' laughter rang out through the night. And for the first time in a long time, Nora didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of something uncertain. She felt like she was home. Spring came to Aspen Hollow like a whispered promise. The snow melted slower this year, reluctant to leave, clinging to the corners of rooftops and shaded forest trails. But buds had already started to appear on the branches out back, and the air smelled different. Softer, sweeter, like it had exhaled the weight of winter. Nora stood barefoot in the doorway of the back porch, steaming coffee in hand, the house behind her full of quiet Saturday morning sounds, murmured cartoons, the occasional crash of toy bins, Eli's constant narration of something or other, and the soft scrape of Caleb cooking in the kitchen. She watched as Sophie tiptoed outside in pajamas and rubber boots, her small arms cradling a baby rabbit made from mismatched socks and buttons. She paused at the edge of the porch like she needed permission. "You're up early," Nora said gently. Sophie nodded, holding the toy closer. She had a bad dream. Nora knelt beside her. "Want to sit for a bit?" They sat together on the steps, the wood still cool beneath them. The backyard stretched ahead, muddy in places, alive in others. The bird feeder Caleb hung last week swung slightly in the breeze, already attracting blue jays and tiny nervous finches. Sophie leaned against her. "Do you think my mom's okay?" It had been 3 months since Danny left for a job out of state, just a waitress position, but stable. She called twice a week now, always the same, warm, a little awkward, full of promises that Sophie was starting to trust again, little by little. "I think she's trying her best," Nora said softly. "And sometimes that's all anyone can do." Sophie didn't say anything for a long time. "Then I like it here." Nora felt a lump rise in her throat. "I like you here." Inside, Caleb appeared at the window holding up a plate of pancakes like it was a trophy. Nora smiled and nodded, standing as Sophie bounced back inside, giggling when Eli tackled her with syrup-sticky fingers. The kitchen was warm, messy, alive. Caleb turned toward her as she walked in. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking." He set the plate down. "Dangerous." She gave him a look, then leaned in to kiss his cheek. "I'm thinking we need a bigger kitchen." His eyes widened. "Really?" 3 kids, 1 narrow counter. "You do the math." He laughed. "You're right. We could knock out the wall between the pantry and the mudroom. Open it up." "Look at you," she teased, turning into a small-town renovator. He wrapped his arms around her. "All I ever wanted was the right kind of chaos." Her eyes softened. "This is it. This is it." Later that afternoon, they walked through town together, Nora, Caleb, and the kids. The bakery had a new window display. The flower shop was already setting out spring bouquets, and Pastor Jim waved from across the street while unloading boxes for the food drive. "Hey, Nora," he called out. "You still good for next Friday?" Nora smiled. Wouldn't miss it. She was helping organize the town's first spring community dinner, something that had started as a one-off charity event and quickly turned into a tradition. Caleb had volunteered to grill. The boys were in charge of stacking chairs. Sophie was on juice box duty. As they passed the community board, Nora paused. A flyer caught her eye, local news announcing a scholarship fund launched in the name of Caleb's late wife, sponsored anonymously. The photo beside it was small but unmistakable. A snapshot from years ago. Danny laughing with Eli in her arms. Nora touched the edge of the paper. She didn't say anything. Caleb slid an arm around her waist. "I thought it was time." She looked up at him. "It's perfect." That night, after the kids were in bed and the house had finally quieted, Caleb lit a fire in the hearth. They curled up on the couch, a quilt wrapped around their legs, the ring still warm on her finger. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about how we got here?" she asked. "All the time. If someone told me back then in that empty diner at 2 a.m. that the man I served eggs and black coffee to would end up building a life with me, I would have thought they were out of their minds," Caleb finished. She laughed quietly. "But here we are. Here we are." There was a long silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "The old life, the city, the meetings, the power?" He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I miss parts of who I used to be," he said. "But not the life. This is where I'm supposed to be." She exhaled, slow and steady. "I never thought I'd be someone's home." "You're mine," he said. "You always were." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire, the quiet of the night, and the solidness of his hand in hers sink into her bones. And as she sat there, wrapped in love that had been hard-earned and patiently grown, she finally understood something she hadn't before. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you thought you wanted. It gives you something better. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough. More than enough.